this is a weekly Dartcast, and I am Ellis Cole, representing Rustbury on the 180.
Hello and welcome to Weekly Dartscast. Special episode as our esteemed co-host Alex is not able to join this week as he's moved house and doesn't have his Wi-Fi set up. So instead, we have our brilliant producer alongside me. In case you don't know, I'm Burton DeWitt, and I'm joined by Hanna Frostman. Hanna, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, fresh off of work and ready to talk about anything that isn't my day job.
Yeah, well, I'm enjoying spending my lunch break away from my day job talking with you about darts. So a lot to talk about, of course. It was only there were two events this past weekend that we'll discuss, both the final weekend of the women's series ahead of the cutoff for the World Matchplay, as well as the third senior major of the year. We'll also talk looking ahead to the last weekend before the cutoff for the World Matchplay this upcoming weekend. So a bit to talk about, but let's start with that women's series. Another 3 titles from the 4 events this weekend for Bo Greaves. But it was also the best weekend of 2023 for someone we've talked a lot about in the past, but haven't talked as much about this year, Fallon Sherrock. She won her first title of the year. She also had a runner-up. How do you rate Sherrock's game as we reach the midpoint of 2023?
Yeah, so Fallon is a bit all over the shop at times. She's kind of lacked that consistency. On her day when she's being pressed, she can turn out quite reasonable mid-90s averages. She also has moments where she brings 60 averages to the board. So I looked over all the matches this weekend, and she was pretty consistently between the mid-70s, mid-80s, and then as the tournament went on, managed to find higher runs. And I think that is interesting and also really key, because obviously the deeper you get into tournaments, number one, the longer you've been there. So the instinct is to kind of exhaust yourself. Because there's been so much time and because you play 2 events in a day, it's just starting to get heavy overall. So to be able to reach the later stages and bring up and continue to bring your best is so key, because of course when you get to later stages you are playing the people who have brought their best throughout, so you do need to raise your game. So the fact that she was able to raise her game toward the ends of the tournaments was really interesting and really helpful in terms of her overall results. And we've seen before that when she gets on TV and tries to, there was talk about her maybe with the match play last year. Was she going to win? Is she going to find that consistency? And she brought, her A game to the television stage. So I'm sure she'll be practicing quite heavily in the lead up to the match play, because she is the defending champ and she will want to win that again. And of course, Bo was not entered last year, and that presents a roadblock for her. So she will need that A game, and she will need more consistency, because of course with that shorter format, if you approach the board playing a 60 average, even if it's just a one-off, you're not going to make it past the next one. So I think she'll be on the board quite heavily. I think she'll be encouraged by the fact that she was able to keep that stamina going and get into the 90s a few times there toward the later stages of the tournament, because she will need that to go on. But I think the consistency is still maybe a risk. So definitely some extra hard yards on the board between now and then.
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement with you. I mean, I think there's definitely still questions over her game. She's not near where she was a couple of years ago. And even though there have been signs that she's getting back, and obviously there's many reasons why her game might have dropped, which we've discussed on this show. A lot of that is just the constant pressure, and more than that, abuse that she's received from a lot of fans. And the fact that she was thrown fully into the spotlight, maybe before she was ready to fully be in the spotlight. But there's been signs that she's been coming back. And you mentioned, of course, that World Matchplay last year, Women's World Matchplay last year, where she went on and played the best darts that she played in 2022 on the way to the title, which does bode well for her now. But at the same time, even though she won a title and made a final this weekend, winning the title on Saturday, making a final on Sunday. I think it was in some ways a regression over the previous weekend. If we go back a month ago, I thought that was her best darts of 2023 by far. If you compare the 2 days, the 2 weekends, the one in May, she had 10 90-plus averages. She only had 4 across the events this past weekend. Go back again, she only had 2 averages more than 5 points below her seasonal average. So if you think her seasonal average, most of her matches will be 5 points in either direction. If she's more than 5 points below that, you could think of that as a poor match. She only had 2 of such of those matches a month ago. She had 5 this weekend, including some that were well below her season average, as low as 68. She won that match on the way to making the final. But it shows that she's been having moments where she's not playing anywhere near even her B or C game. If you compare as well how often she managed to hit her season average, this weekend she only did it in 9 of her 20 matches. A lot of them were really close to her average on one side or another, within a point or two, but only 9 of them did she exceed her seasonal average. You go back a month ago, 14 of the 23, she exceeded her seasonal average. And even when she was losing a month ago, she averaged 93, 92, 94 in 3 of those 4 losses. The other one was a little bit lower, but still right at her seasonal average. This time around, she was not hitting nearly those same heights. And even on that road to the title, 78, 80, 81, 70, 81, all of those matches up to the final against Robin Byrne were below her seasonal average. The one against Natalie Gilbert, well below her seasonal average of 83, 13 points below. She did up her game in the final. And at the end of the day, you can only beat what's before you. And she didn't have to play all that well in many of these matches to win. And she won most of her matches. She won 17 of the 20, including some wins over very good players. She beat Aline de Graaf 3 times. She beat Lisa Ashton. She beat Lorraine Winstanley twice. This was a very good weekend, but it wasn't her at her very best. And it wasn't anywhere near her at her very best. I think there's still question marks over her game. The consistency's not there. It's not at least where she wants it to be. She has that ability to lift her game, and she has lifted her game. When she needed to, she went 10 points above her daily average and beat Robin Byrne in the final. When she had to, she lifted her game and pushed Bo Greaves to a last leg decider, averaging her second highest average of the tournament at just a shade under 91. She's been able to lift her game when she needs to, and she's been getting wins, and she's been playing much closer to what we expect her to. But there are still questions. There's still not that consistency. I think she's right now at her B minus level. And if she wants to win the title at the World Matchplay, she probably needs to up that. Yes, she can beat Bo Greaves, even not playing her best, but it's a lot more difficult. Even playing her best, Bo Greaves is probably still better right now than Fallon Sherrock. So I think she needs to find a little bit more scoring power, a little bit more consistency, or else she could go out first match. The field is deep enough, which we'll get to in a second. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but it is, at the very least, even if it was a regression from the previous weekend, still signs of an overall step up from where her game was a year ago.
And Noah Lynn Van Leuven's second final means that she beats Lorraine Winstanley to the spot for the last spot of the match play. And what do you make of that field of 8 for Blackpool?
Well, I think at the end, we have pretty much the right field. And we talked about it. Alex and I talked about last week, where if you look at the averages, and again, I talked a lot about averages on the last question, and averages aren't everything, but over the course of a season, the average does do a good job of indicating where someone's game is. A one match average, not that important. A seasonal average, very important in seeing the standard. And if you look at the 8 people who qualify, and if you take out the people who didn't play all 3 weekends this year, some of them might have missed some weekends last year. Bo Greaves, of course, only played a quarter of the season and won almost everything. But if you just look at the people who played every weekend this year, the 8 people who qualified are the 8 highest averages that played all 12 events. And the next 2 were the next 2 left out. So we end up with the players who are playing the best. The 8 players over 73 average who played all the weekends are here. Noah Lynn Van Leuven's the only one who snuck in at the end, but she's also playing her best darts right now. She made a final in the last event last weekend, her first final in the women's series, and gave Mikuru Suzuki a very good run for her money. She had led the match early on, but in the end, Mikuru was just too much for her. This time around, she made a second final. She had no chance in that final, but that was not her fault. Bo Greaves averaged 104 and change in winning that match 5-0. Noah Lynn's game is not anywhere yet near the level to contend when Bo Greaves is playing at, well, what we now almost expect Bo Greaves to do from time to time. Overall, it was another really good weekend, and she kept getting results, and she put together that run to the final right at the same time. You know, beating Rhiannon O'Sullivan in the quarterfinals with all the pressure, knowing that she needed that win to get there, to go and beat one of the better players and one of the people who will also be in this event in that match. I think we now end up, as a result, with a better field than we did last year. Because one, the players knew from the event last year that they had 12 months to prepare and get ready for this, as opposed to last year where it kind of sprung on. So the players now had something to aim for and a reason to go and play these tournaments, and that carrot has been there the entire time, and they've pushed and lifted one another. But beyond that, I just think the depth of the game is so much stronger. And now that we are, I mean, obviously COVID still exists, but we're not feeling the scheduling effects like we had in the past. And now players are playing not just these, but other tournaments and are playing pretty much full schedules. The players are almost all improved. I think the only player in this field who I think right now is weaker than she was a year ago, Ashton. There's obviously something struggling with Lisa Ashton's game. She still is one of the best players in the world. She still is at least one of the 8 best players in the women's series, and that's why she's here. It's why she's 4th in averages this year. But she's the only player who's made a clear regression from a year ago. Noah Lynn obviously has upped her game. Robin Byrne has upped her game. Rhiannon O'Sullivan's was one of the surprise packages last year. She's become much more consistent this year. Aline de Graaf, probably playing similar to she was last year, but again, more consistent as she's played more of these. And obviously, you know, we talked about Fallon on the last question, but beyond that, we've seen the emergence of Bo Greaves, and Mikuru Suzuki has, now that she's been coming to all of these weekends, really shown that she is the 2nd or 3rd best player in women's darts. I think we've ended up with a much stronger field than we did last year, and we haven't seen what's going to happen in the next 12 months, but I can already say this field is going to be much weaker than the field will be from 12 months from now. The game keeps improving. These players keep lifting one another up. Yes, Bo Greaves may have regressed a little bit in the last couple months from where she was when she first appeared, but not by much. It's more people have caught up to her or are trying to catch up to her because they have to. And as they improve, as Mikuru improves her game, as she reaches her A game more often, as Fallon Sherrock begins to get back to where she was a couple years ago, it's forcing all those other people to also lift their games. I'm really excited to see how this field plays out. It's so much stronger than it was last year. It's more wide open than it might seem, even though Bo Greaves is and should be the heavy favorite. But I also think it's a weaker field than it will be a year from now because, well, the game just keeps getting tougher.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the examples of a player being really strong and then lifting somebody else's game to levels that they didn't know they had in them was in one of the women's series last year. Lisa Ashton was playing Kirsty Hutchinson, and Kirsty Hutchinson brought a 90-plus average against Lisa. She still lost, but when I spoke to Kirsty afterwards, she said, I didn't know I had a 90-plus average anywhere in my game. Of course, Lisa couldn't bloody let me win that one, but the fact was with Lisa having her game and having come off of having her tour card and having her at the top of her game and having Fallon, you know, when she was on her day at the top of her game, was driving the people who are playing them to produce better numbers just across the board, not just the 8 that made the match play, but across the board. But now that you've had Mikuru come over for all of them and you've had Bo enter, those have brought the numbers up as well. Because, yes, Bo is miles ahead of everybody in terms of the ranking money, but that's not to say that she's impossible to beat, whether that be in the women's series or other place. I mean, she was playing in a BDO tournament in Almudena. Gosh, I cannot remember her surname. Last from Spain. Absolutely crushed her. Absolutely crushed her. And it was just, shocking. But Bo pushes people in a way that they have to find their best. And when that happens, you may not even know that your best is in the 90s, but sometimes that's where you get pushed to. And so I don't think that we have anybody that shouldn't have qualified for this. I think this is closer to what we may have expected last year. If you had started at the beginning of the year and said, give me your 8 best women's players, regardless of who had signed up. Of course, it was who had signed up. So without Bo being there, Lisa and Fallon would be definitely in your field. I think other players, more like Katie Sheldon, who's still very talented and wasn't too far outside of the 8, and is going to be a force to be reckoned with. Lorraine just outside, so she's still playing a really strong game. Brianna Griffiths had a bit of a falter this year where they've stopped making her darts, so she's adjusting to new darts and things like that. But this is definitely, I feel, more, if you had sat people down and said, give me your field of 8, this is closer to what you would have expected last year. And so the fact that these people have carried on with their games into next year, maybe Robin Burns a bit of a surprise, not because she's not quality, but maybe she wasn't, expected based on previous world championships or anything along those lines. But I do think that is what makes it exciting, that we have a field of 8, that there are 5 different people than there were last year. And like you said, that the quality and standard can only go up because more and more people are attending these events. People are getting used to these formats. People are getting used to how these things are laid out. People are finding new levels as they approach things. Rianne versus Makuru in Milton Keynes, we had 102 or 103 average in that. I mean, it's only on its way up, and having the involvement of as many players as humanly possible from all different parts of the game and from all over the world who have all these different A, B, C games that they throw out at different times will make it to the point where a 70 average won't be enough. Right now, a 70 average will get you through, but I would say last year, 60s could get you through. So I think as it goes, we're going to find more and more women reaching 80s and 90s. And eventually, once they reach 80s and 90s, just like the men reaching 90s and 100 plus, I think they're going to kind of catch up with each other. And I think that'll be really fun to see, because then that'll produce exciting things for the World Championships where they have those 2 women's spots. So I think the right field is there. I'm very excited. I'm very glad I paid a metric ton to ensure that I will be in Blackpool, and I cannot wait to bring whatever interviews I can from that weekend.
Attention all dart enthusiasts, this is ZR, your host from In the Mud Sports, and I have an exciting announcement for you. Are you ready to take your darting experience to the next level? Introducing In the Mud Sports, the premier online darts league for amateurs like yourself. We're not your typical darts league, it's an experience like no other. It's where you can showcase your skills, make new friends, and have an absolute blast. We have a vibrant community where camaraderie is key and darts meets pure enjoyment. Whether you're a singles player or love the excitement of team events, In the Mud Sports has got you covered. We are perfect for amateurs who want to have fun and improve their game along the way. It is your time to shine. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to elevate your darting experience and join 80 plus players from all around the world. Together we'll create unforgettable moments on and off the oche. You can catch all updates about where we are going live next through Twitter and Instagram at In the Mud Sports. See you guys there.
Moving on from the women's series, this past weekend was also the World Senior Darts Masters, where Leonard Gates won his second major of the year on the senior tour, beating Richie Howson 6-2 in the finals. But now this question, one of our listeners sent in, but we wanted to discuss it anyway and give it a full discussion, because I think it's a valid question. Between Leonard Gates winning 2 this year and Robert Thornton dominating the first couple years of the senior tour, do you think it somewhat defeats the purpose of the senior tour to have players who are still competing regularly at the professional or semi-professional level playing in these events?
It's definitely an interesting question. I think there's a couple of different routes to answer that. I think if the purpose of the tour was meant to be a Glory Days retirement session where people who had retired from darts can be seen again in basically glorified exhibitions. I mean, if that's what the Premier League is, that's definitely what the Senior League is. But, I mean, glorified exhibitions where you can guarantee that you see your favorite stars of yore play one another and don't have to worry about them not being seated in the same section of the draw and things like that. If that's the main function and appeal of the senior tour, then it probably does defeat the purpose to have people who are playing regularly professionally. I think people went into it, if you were going into it with kind of a betting man game stakes, you would say, this is going to be Phil Taylor's kind of place to shine. He's only a few years retired. He didn't go out on the worst game. He was playing really well. He's still been doing exhibitions, so this will be his moment to kind of capitalize on that. But of course, we've not seen that because we have Leonard Gates and we have, Robert Thornton, who, either have tour cards or just lost tour cards. Now we've got John Henderson. Just the announcements of once you reach 50, you can join the tour. On one hand, if it's just you want to see people over the age of 50 who maybe don't have their tour card anymore, maybe you enjoy watching them play and you want to see a high level of competition and have it be just basically an upper class level, then it wouldn't defeat the purpose. Because I think, right now, without having a tour card, where are we going to see Robert Thornton? Leonard Gates is big and playing in America and doesn't have a ton of money to be out playing in England all the time. As much fun as it is to watch him play out here and enjoy that. So it really does come down to what is it meant to be for and what is it? Because, Robert Thornton's going to clean up when he comes off of having his tour card. Leonard Gates is, still playing in matches and playing at Madison Square Gardens and things. So they're fun to watch still. So from a fun to watch perspective, it is still fun to watch. From a, we're going to bring back the golden oldies and you're going to see all the people that you remember, from your youth or from your earlier years have these epic clashes. We have to remember that those epic clashes, sometimes the top of the game and the top of the games that people had then have long been surpassed now. And to keep those games up when retired and only playing exhibitions to keep them up to the level that they were at is difficult when you're not playing day to day. So when you face somebody who is playing day to day or is playing more regularly, it'll be more complicated. It turns out less results. So I'm conflicted because I don't watch too much of it. Mainly because of scheduling things. So this weekend I missed, big chunks of it due to watching the women's series, for example. But I think what people expected it to be was all your favorites from the days of yore. And what it's turned into is anybody who's 50 plus who wins through a qualifier. And the more recently you've played, the more easier that is. So I can see arguments for both because I think it's quite fun to watch Soldier play. I think he's fantastic and cannot get enough Leonard Gates. At the same time, more Trina Gulliver, more, Bob Anderson, who we'll talk about in a bit, people getting deeper into rounds that people were excited to see play again might have been a little bit more fun for the average viewer. So mixed feelings, really.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to have mixed feelings. I think the senior tour has two concurring but also conflicting objectives. One of those is to give that opportunity for not just players but also fans to see those the players from yesteryear, to see the Phil Taylors, Bob Anderson, John Parts, who no longer are competing professionally, but for a long time did and only went and won world titles and other major events. But the other thing is to give opportunity for players who might want to continue playing competitively or fairly consistently and still have that drive and ability, but are no longer at the level that they need to match their heights from yesteryear. Players like Robert Thornton, other players over 50 who might never have reached it, like Leonard Gates, although he obviously was a top soft tip player for a while. And now that we've seen him play steel tip, we've seen what he's been able to do. But also Dennis Harbour, who made the semifinals, Richie Howson. There's a lot of players like that who are north of 50 and still can play well, maybe if even better than they ever had before, and giving them competition that they can play against without having to dedicate themselves against people 30 years younger than them, and with the energy of people 30 years younger than them, I think is a key point as well. And you have to balance that, and it's a tough balance. I've talked about it before when we've discussed the senior tour, figuring out what is that right number of spots to reserve for the people who are going to sell tickets, those Phil Taylors, those Bob Andersons, those John Parts, and how many spots to reserve for players who are playing at a higher level, but might not draw the fans, those Richie Housens and Dennis Harbors, is a tough balance to get. And I don't think it defeats the purpose to have them there. I think, in fact, that is the main purpose. The other players are there to fund the event, to make sure that the tickets are going to be sold, to make sure that there's a modicum of sponsorship, to make sure that people tune in. That's why those players are there. They're not there to contest the final rounds unless they up their games and play it. Obviously, Phil Taylor has done it. He's not playing anywhere near what he did 5 years ago, but he's still a force. He's still a player who on his day can beat anyone in this field, and is still a player that you're not surprised to see make a run. And yes, he lost in the quarterfinals, but that match could have gone the other way. And if it went the other way, the way he was playing, he very well could have then beaten Richie Howson in the semifinals. We're not that far off from Phil Taylor having made the finals or maybe even winning this event. We're not that far off from John Part making it and beating Robert Thornton in the quarterfinals. He was 2 legs away because he got it to a final set. He didn't play the best final set, but he forced Thornton into a final set. So you still have that opportunity if those players up their games. But that's not, I don't think, what this exists for. It exists to give opportunities for players over 50 to still compete and win events and ply their trade like they did or might not have done earlier in their career. It invites those other players so that there are tickets, so that the prize money exists, so that there's the attention. And I think, therefore, it doesn't defeat the purpose. I think it is, in fact, the purpose. And we've seen Leonard Gates emerge in the senior events. We've seen Richie Howson and Dennis Harbour emerge in the senior events when we never really saw that much of them before. That's, I think, the actual purpose of it. So I'm going to say no.
We talked about Blackpool the last couple of weeks, but we're only 4 events from the cutoff of the European Championships. Who could do themselves a world of good this weekend towards Dortmund?
Yeah, it's weird thinking that we're so close. And but after this weekend, there'll be only 3 events left before the cutoff for the European Championships, because most of the European Tour events come early in the year, while in the second half of the year, we have more of those Players' Championship events. We still have more than half the Players' Championship events to go, but we're almost done with the European Tour. I mean, there's so much money on the line that anyone, as long as they qualify for that last event in the European Tour schedule, still has a chance to get to the European Championships. And that's something that's a little weird to think about, because it's, £30,000 for whoever goes on and wins the title. The cutoff's probably going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 16,000, 17,000. It's tough to fully estimate because this is the first year with the new prize money, but it seems to be playing out that way. If you look at the prize money so far, it looks like players are averaging a little bit more. The player that in 32nd place, Matters Razma, is averaging a little bit more than £1,000 per event. Obviously, he's not qualifying for everyone. Otherwise, he'd be averaging a lot more, which means extrapolated out across 13 events means you need somewhere in that vicinity of 16 to 17,000. Well, so far there's 22 players above 17,000 in prize money. Stephen Bunting in 22nd, including provisional money for players who've qualified for this event, is at 17,750. That doesn't mean he's guaranteed, but the way things are looking, the way things are going, that seems like that'll be enough. Dimitri Vandenberg's in 23rd. He's exactly at 17,000. That's probably there or thereabouts already. Maybe winning another match or qualifying for another event will help him. Certainly wouldn't hurt him. Any event you qualify helps, and he's in this event as a seed, meaning if he wins a match, that's another 4,000 pounds because currently he doesn't have any on his ranking money. That would certainly put him in. So, but of the first people who are not yet clearly qualified, it's Steve Beaton. He probably needs to qualify for another one of these, but he's not here. Christoph Ratajski also not here, has work to do. But then you get to some players who are here and still need to win some matches. Brendan Dolan in a very good shape to qualify, but probably needs to get another 2,000-3,000 pounds. Winning one match here will do half of that. Winning one match here also might be enough to get him to the World Matchplay because he's in that race as well. But Brendan Dolan's really that first player who starts to need to get some results. Some of the other ones who need a result, how about Matt Campbell? Probably not going to get to the World Matchplay. Needs to make at least the final here. But right now, he's in that third to last spot, and he's only 2,500 pounds ahead of one of the other people I'm going to mention to qualify for this. If he can win a match here, another 1,250 pounds, he's suddenly not safe yet, but much closer to that safety level. Then he just needs to think, let me win through 2 of the 3 qualifiers remaining. I'm there. Winning just one match does him a lot of good because if he doesn't, then he's going to have still quite a bit of work to do. Also in that race right now, Jim Williams. He's the first person currently outside the European Championship spots. But good news for him, he might be outside, but he's in this event. And if he wins a match, he now jumps up on countback ahead of Matars Razma for that last spot. Jim Williams, we've talked about him. He won an event last year. That was surprising. But he's upped his game since then, and he's become a much more consistent player. That's why he's still on the outside of the race for the World Matchplay and the World Grand Prix. That's why he's right there in the middle of the race for this. But there's a few others who are just behind him as well. Riccardo Pietreczko, he's currently in this field as one of the German qualifiers. He gets in by right, so none of his money is on his ranking yet. If he wins one match, that's 2,500 pounds. That zooms him right up ahead of Matars Razma, and even if Jim Williams wins a match, ahead of Jim Williams. It's a huge opportunity for Riccardo Pietreczko, and one that he needs. He's still in that chance for the match play. He's still right there in the race for the World Grand Prix as well. This is a big opportunity for him. And then people like Simon Whitlock, Kim Hybrex, both are in this field. Both have even more work to do. Ted Ebbets, more work to do, but is in this field. Those players need to start winning multiple games, and we don't know until the draw whether they'll have, who they might have even in the first round, but if they get through the first round as a seed. But winning one match isn't enough. They need to start putting together a run, some point, get that quarterfinal run, get that 6,000 pounds. There's a lot of opportunity because there's so much money at stake in these events. And, well, the European Championship race, I think, is going to tighten up. Right now, there's a big gap between 31st and 33rd. I don't think that'll be the case after this weekend.
Yeah, you've managed to hit upon all the people that I was looking at, because, of course, I'm looking at the people who are right there on the cusp. Like you said, Matars Razma, Matt Campbell, Keegan Brown's not around this weekend, so Riccardo Pietreczko, Jim Williams, all right there. Depending on how the draw goes, you could see those 4 shift round fairly easily. So they really need to kind of make a statement. And of course, with the Euro Tour leading up to this, we have seen some fairly decent matches, especially from Riccardo Pietreczko, who we maybe didn't expect to see such quality from. So you'd fancy that if he ends up with a decent draw, he really could shake things up here and move up the list. It is interesting how many pieces kind of fall out and how many look basically set to say that it looks like largely, the top 22, 24, possibly even 25 already set in there, unless people really don't qualify and some people have big runs. It's hard to say with 4 left. But yeah, I would say that my 4 to watch this weekend are definitely Matters and Matt and Ricardo and Jim, just because they're so close at that end there. So any single one of them that goes a bit further than the rest, or pair of them that goes further than the other two, will really shake up those numbers. So it'll be an exciting weekend for who is there and who qualifies for the next ones. I think it would be unwise, with things being this close, to be able to speculate on who gets where, with there still being 4 events to go and who's qualified for what. So it'll be exciting per usual. And those are my 4 to watch. So I guess come on Canada is in the absence of American people. Come on Canada. Oh, Canada.
Yes, and it's a good time for Canada since we're just a few days away from Canada Day on the 1st of July. But we'll finish off with just one question. We'll do this one rapid fire. It's a listener question that comes from a friend of the pod, Warren Allsworth. As we mentioned that we would come back to Bob Anderson. This past weekend, of course, was Bob Anderson's final tournament in the senior tour, at least televised tournament. What are your favorite memories of him? And do you think his achievements make him underrated?
So I am going to be super honest. My husband adores Bob Anderson, one of his biggest fans. We have Bob Anderson's picture in our lounge. However, the heyday of Bob Anderson was when I was 3, 4, 5, 6. So what I remember of him in the moment is nothing. And what I know of him in the moment now is just things viewed through YouTube, the famous horse entrance. But having looked through his accomplishments and processed them in the lens of kind of everything that was going on, if I had to pick a favorite, I would pick based on, well, I'll tell you what it's based on. Let me pick it first so people can join me here. I would go with that 1988 World Championship. And now here's the reason. For the World Championship, he did play 5 matches. Every single one of his 5 matches was an over 90 average. And 4 of those 5 was an over 97 average. And what I think is just delightful when it comes to that final, because leading up to that final, he had absolutely crushed everybody. 3-1, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0. All the way up until he runs into John Lowe. And John Lowe versus, it's 6-4 when it comes to John Lowe. But something that's just delightful for me in terms of stats and figures is Bob Anderson averages 92.70 against John Lowe, who averages 92.07. And that's just delightful in terms of numbers. And it's an incredible standard for 1988. John Lowe to get there through 3 90-plus averages to make it to the final by comparison. So that's just miles and miles ahead of what everybody was bringing to the table at that moment. So a deserved winner for sure. And I think when you put that in perspective and you consider that run of the match plays, or the Masters, sorry, that you probably do come up that he was a bit underrated for his time. Definitely the best of the best for a while there. You would say, considering that, 87 match play, the 3 Masters in a row, ending with the championships that same year, that 86 to 88, he should be considered the best player in the world for those times. And to be the best player in the world for 3 years, as opposed to falling off to somebody who's raising their game, and compared to other people who are coming up and qualified in talent, and people who are still seeing, playing, things, today, whether it was Phil Taylor, Rod Harrington, who, these people with seniors tour with Kevin Painter and stuff. If we consider all that quality and all the places that we put Phil Taylor and Kevin Painter and Rod Harrington and things, the fact that Bob Anderson hasn't necessarily reached that portion of people's mind is probably a shame and testament to how underrated he is. It may also be testament to the fact that some of them went on to commentate, and some of them went on to win the PDC World Tournament 16 times. Who's to say? But yeah, I think he was underrated. And I think it was really good, especially for lifelong fans like my husband, to get to see him on TV one more time for those memories.
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement there as well. My favorite moment in memory of his has to be the only one I got to see because he is from before my time. So I never got to see him compete at his best or, compete at all because by the time I started watching darts in 2012, he had already retired from the PDC a good 5-6 years earlier. So my first time watching him live and not just on a YouTube video was when he played in the first round of the World Seniors last year. So my favorite memory has to be his last visit of that match where he threw the 180. It didn't turn that match around, obviously. He was still well back in the leg, let alone in the match. But that moment, just that smile, the enjoyment that he was able to throw that 180 for the fans. And that's, I think, who he was happy for. Not for himself. He was just doing it for fun. But to give the fans a 180 in his return to the stage was just electric. So that has to be my favorite memory of watching him play. But his greatest achievement, you mentioned it, I think you focused on the World Championships, but you did mention those 3 consecutive World Masters. And I think that's why he's underrated. The fact that he was able to do that when the World Masters was every bit, if not more, difficult to win than the World Championships. If you look through the history, the only people ever to win 3 consecutive World Masters was Bob Anderson, Martin Adams, and Trina Gulliver. Of course, Trina won 4 in a row, but that's a far cry from the 7 consecutive World Championships she won, because this event was so much more difficult. And in fact, it was like, in essence, the World Championships until the BDO World Championships came out in 1978, and for women's in 2000. And you look, there were players who won 2 in a row, but they couldn't make it to 3. Mandy Solomons won back-to-back in the women's event. You had Glenn Durant just recently won back-to-back, but went out to a 100 average to the eventual champion Christopher Tyskie in the quarterfinals when he was going for 3 in a row. Eric Bristow won back-to-back, never managed to win 3 in a row. Stephen Bunting also won back-to-back, but he didn't have a chance to defend his title because he had switched over to the PDC. So we don't know. Maybe he would have done 3 in a row. But it's brutally difficult. Only 3 people, and men or women, ever managed to win 3 in a row, and he was the first. He did it in 86, 87, 88. You mentioned the match play. You mentioned the World Championship. That's 5 majors in the space of 24 months that he managed to win, including this extremely difficult event 3 consecutive years. He was, if not the best, pretty darn close to it for multiple years at a time when there were some pretty good players. You still had John Lowe winning world titles. You still had Jockey Wilson winning world titles. Eric Bristow might have been dealing with the dartitis at the time, but he still was a formidable player, and he did come back from that. Bob Anderson was the last player to emerge before Phil Taylor emerged, the last player to truly take that next step and become great. And in the end, he did get overshadowed by Phil Taylor, and to a lesser extent by Dennis Priestley. But I think he's underrated. I think what he managed to achieve and the amount and how good he played for those few years, especially in an era that's remembered for other players who were still at their best at that time, means he has to be underrated because he was every bit as good, if not better, than Lowe, Bristow, and Wilson during those years. That's why he won those events. Anything else for this week?
Not much, just mainly to say, Alex, please come back, get your Wi-Fi. We can't live without you. And thank you to our sponsor, Dartwolf, as ever. We appreciate the support. And I often, when I record these, forget to say anything about him. So I hope I remember you for the match play, Dartwolf. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you to Dartwolf. Thank you to Well, obviously, thank you to you, Hanna, for filling in this week for Alex and bringing all your insight from the women's series, as well as obviously your insight for other stuff in darts too. We'll be back next week, hopefully with Alex if he has his Wi-Fi. If not, I guess it's you and me again, probably upping the quality. I mean, it's always upping the quality when you're here, and upping it even more when I'm not. But we'll be back next week to recap the 10th Euro Tour event of the year, the last one before the cutoff for the World Match Play, and begin looking ahead to Blackpool on both the men's and the women's side. A lot to talk about for both of those. We'll try to bring you some players from both events, as well as some other players from other things going on in the world of darts. Hang tight, because, well, what else are you going to do? It's almost World Match Play time. Just hang tight until then.